hanging out with us today. We do appreciate it. I'm Rob Ellis. That's Tony Shields in for Derek Gunn. We're Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Always excited when our next guest drops by. Does a phenomenal job for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Of course, noted author as well. You could follow him on Twitter/X at Mike Sielski, and he's got a great story today, which I want to dig into in 1 second. Mike, thanks for hopping on with us, man. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob. Hey, Tone, how are you guys?
Tone's great. He gets to hang out with me every day. So, Mike, he's
what could be better? What could be better?
Life can't get any better than this.
Halo over his head for dealing with me every day, Mike. All right, so I want to get to a bunch of stuff with the Eagles with you, and I want to mix some Sixers in and some Big Five, as I always seem to do. You and I are the last vestiges of anybody who cares.
We are. We're clinging with our fingernails are,
yeah, we're hanging there,
almost off of our hands here.
But I want to hit you with this because I love this piece today, and I don't want to butcher the man's last name, but it's Tim Chiarolanza. Yes. So, who is the strength and conditioning coach for Lycoming College? But it's an unbelievable triumph story. But Mike, I know this was one that some stories come to you quick and you can bang it out and it's great and all. It's like a great song, right? I wrote it in 15 minutes, but this one took you a while, man. So give us a little bit of the background for folks who maybe haven't read it yet, and please do if you haven't checked it out yet.
Sure. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, Tim grew up in Bucks County in Warminster. He went to William Tennant High School, played on their soccer and football teams. He was the kicker for the football team, went on and played college football at Lycoming, and bounced around for a while, and then finally settled on becoming Lycoming's strength and conditioning coach. And he had that job for a few weeks in the fall of 2021 when he was on campus walking his dog, and the dog, Finn, a puppy, broke off its leash and ran into the street. And Tim went after Finn and was hit by a car going 40 miles an hour. And that's kind of where the story picks up. And it takes you through his injuries and what he went through. And I don't want to spoil it for people.
Yeah, don't give too much away. But
that's basically the beginning point of it. And I talked to a lot of people connected with Tim to try to tell this story, and I hope people find it sad and inspirational and just a good story.
Yeah, no, I thought it's a phenomenal read. And Jesus, Dad's description of the kind of shape he was in after. I mean, oh man, it just grabs you.
It's one of those there, but for the grace of God.
Yeah.
Stories, you know? So I worked on it over the course of about 8 months, and it came out today, and I appreciate you mentioning it. Thanks.
Yeah. No
Mike, really quickly, when you're covering a story like that and you get so deep into the weeds with it, I mean, like you said, it took you about 8 months to get it together. What does that do to you mentally and emotionally as a writer? I mean, you've covered a lot of different aspects of of various sports, the Kobe Bryant story, his legacy, so on and so forth. But a story like this, it can happen to almost anybody. What does it do to you emotionally and mentally? Immersing yourself, in the life of of this guy.
That's a great question, Tone. I put myself in the shoes of Tim's father, Ron, who was a teacher at Council Rock High School and a basketball coach in the Council Rock School District. And I'm the father of 2 boys myself. And just the idea of something happening to one of them, it's the thing, I don't know if you're a parent, Tone, I know Rob is, it's the thing that any mother or father fears most. Yep. And you just, when I'm immersed in a story like that, I just try to get into that mind frame. I mean, it's nothing like what Ron Chiarolanza or any of Tim's family members or Tim went through, but you just try to empathize as much as you can and put yourself in their shoes and understand why they're saying some of the things and doing or have done some of the things that they do or have done. His father was very frank with me about his reaction to the circumstances that led to Tim's accident. Mm-hmm. He couldn't wrap his mind around the fact that Tim chased his dog into the street. And that was a big thing that Ron had to get over and deal with in reckoning with the accident and what happened to his son. And we were able to talk about that. So thanks for the question. That's a really insightful question, I think.
It is. And I thought
really,
that.
really, I'm sorry, Rob. Real quickly,
Yeah.
I gotta ask one more. And forgive me if I'm overstepping, Mike. But were there moments while you're preparing this story? Were there moments where you had to, I don't know, step away and take a break mentally and emotionally because of the stories that you're taking in?
Yeah, only because though, Tone, I'm trying my best to write them as well as I possibly can.
Mhm.
And in a story like this, like Rob kind of hinted at, I'm bleeding over every sentence, and there's a
Mm.
lot of sentences in this story. It's very
Mhm.
long.
Mhm.
If I'm cranking out an 800-word column about the Eagles and I have a half hour to do it, then I'm not bleeding. I just got to write. But in a story like this, you want to get it right. And so there were times where I just said, you know what? I wrote 4 sentences today, and my deadline isn't for another 3 months. So I'm just going to let it go and get a good night's sleep, and I'll come back at it tomorrow. But something like this is different from, hey, Jaylen Herz should be the MVP. It's just not quite the same thing.
And I guess, Mike, too, even though this was an emotional one, that's got to be the nice thing about being a columnist. Yeah, you're on deadline after an Eagles game and you're cranking like anybody else is, but you also have the ability to do something vastly different like this. I would imagine that keeps it fresh for you, and not to mention the work you do as an author and those kind of things. I would think that would help you, that it's not the same subject every single day. And what's my Eagles angle today? Which we go through sometimes, if I'm being frank. But anyway.
Oh, absolutely. And you're right, Rob. I love that. And I love being able to write about things that aren't trending on social media, to be honest. I think so much of what we do in the media now seems to be driven by this very small segment of the population that spends all day on Twitter/X or is constantly checking their phones. Ooh, have the Eagles signed Shaq Leonard yet? Oh, okay, they did. Let me write a quick column without even thinking about it, saying whether I think this is a good idea or a bad idea. I kind of want to swim against that tide. So something like this allows me to do that, and I'm grateful that the Inquirer allows me to do that.
Let me quickly follow on that, because this is swimming against the tide too. Some of your engagements on Twitter/X are special.
Yeah.
But I think you kind of innocuously brought up, hey, Brock Purdy's a pretty amazing underdog story himself. I'm paraphrasing, but
yeah,
you would think, like, if this guy was an Eagle, he'd be the ultimate Eagle story. He's Philadelphia and blah, blah, blah. People went nuts, as you would expect. But I mean, Mr. Irrelevant, and the guy's got a 70 completion percentage and numbers that not only rival, but in some ways are better than Jaylen Herz this year. I mean, it's true. Nobody wants to hear it, but it's true.
Yeah, and that's all I wanted to point out, Rob, is that if the shoe were on the other foot and Brock Purdy were the Eagles quarterback having the season that he's having, being the player that he is, people would be going gaga for this story in Philadelphia because we so prize the underdog. Now, look, Jalen Hurts is an underdog story, and he's a great quarterback, and he could very well be the MVP this season, but he wasn't the last guy picked in the draft, and he wasn't the third-string quarterback who had to step in and play and is now leading the league in passer rating and has 19 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. I'm not saying Brock Purdy is better than Jalen Hurts or that I like him more than Jalen Hurts. I even had people calling me racist on this about this. It's just, it's insane. Like, if you've spent 5 minutes in Philadelphia, you know that people in Philadelphia love underdog stories, and this is the ultimate underdog story. And I was just pointing that out, and people lost their minds over it.
It's a prime example of people are blinded when it comes to the Philadelphia Eagles, man, and people marry themselves to their players so much. And the bottom line is, like, when you really look at it in a vacuum, like you said, Brock Purdy's story, it's so Philadelphia. It's so Philadelphia, but it's the way the cookie crumbles over here, man. If you're not Eagles green,
it is.
People could care less about your story.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, Tone. And I think what's happened with social media over time is that the expectations for media members have changed. You're not expected to take a step back and be a little detached and be able to kind of point things out that don't go along with the narrative of your town or the team that you cover or whatever your political bent is. You're supposed to stay on your team, whatever that team might be. And I just don't buy that. And I find that the best writers and reporters or commentators are the ones who don't do that. I don't want a homer. I don't want somebody who's going to praise the Eagles every single time or say the thing that everybody wants them to say. I want, out of good faith, I want that interesting, different perspective. And I try to provide that. And if people don't want that, there isn't much I can do about it.
Well, Mike, I did 4 hours of a show on radio last week about this, and I had people calling me every name in the book, and I'm like, before I even got into this business, I wanted someone to keep it real. I never wanted to be St. Louis, where it's unconditional love and go home team. Like, I can't do that. It's not who I am. And this was based off of the fact that I picked the Chiefs in the game. People went nuts. So then I turned it into a whole topic. But I'm like, listen to the logic. They're on the road against the defending champs. It's Reed and Mahomes. I'm not saying they're going to lose to, fill in the blank, the Bears or somebody. But it was like, this is where we're at? We have to wave pom-poms now?
Yeah, and that's the thing, Rob. It seems like it's harder for people to separate now. Someone like you do, like what you did, saying what you think, as opposed to what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Right. The expectation from a Philly talk show host is that you want the Eagles to win, therefore you will say the Eagles are going to win. Yeah. And that's not how, at least you and I, and maybe a few other people came up in the business. You're supposed to try to present things as you see them or as they are, whether the people hearing that information or that perspective like it or not.
And it doesn't mean you're not wrong. Obviously, the Eagles beat the Chiefs. Props to the Eagles. I'm going to be wrong, but it's just the way I felt. But anyway, I'm off my soapbox tone.
No, I love talking about stuff like this. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
No, yeah, sure. I mean, you guys brought up interesting points, right? The fact that, people want you to say the Philadelphia Eagles are going to win every game. They want that, right? And look, I'm an Eagles fan, and I don't have that by any stretch of the imagination. I want a lot of things, but last time I checked, everything has to be earned. Everything can be given, right? So in saying that, the Philadelphia Eagles are 10-1, and by every stretch of the imagination, I feel like they've earned that 10-1 record. And 10-1 didn't come as easy this year as it did last year, right? Mike, let's start there. So far at this point in the season, what's been your overall assessment of how the Philadelphia Eagles have gotten to this point?
They're better record-wise than I thought they would be, Tone. I mean, the way they're playing relative to the way they played last season does not surprise me. I said this at the beginning of the season, that it was going to be harder to get back to the Super Bowl, let alone win it. And they may be every bit as good as they were last year in terms of the quality of their play, and have a worse record because their schedule was more difficult and because there's an element of attrition over the course of having a season where you get to the Super Bowl and lose, right? That's really tough to come back from. And so the fact that they're 10-1, that's amazing to me. If I were an Eagles fan, I'd be saying, thank goodness, this is wonderful that my team is 10-1. It very easily could be 8-3 or 7-4 based on some of these games and how close they've been and how close the Eagles have come to losing some of these games. So, look, if they lose to the 49ers, I'm not going to be stunned or surprised. The 49ers are really good. And you just got to see. If I were an Eagles fan, I'd be saying, hey, to a certain degree, they're exceeding my expectations for them this season, that I had placed on them this season.
Mike, so a couple things. They've done it to some degree unconventionally. That they're 10-1, which is amazing, but there's been a lot of comebacks and a lot of slow starts and a lot of stuff. And to their credit, they really dominated teams in the second half here, and if you want to include overtime as well. Sustainability has been a big question this week. You've gotten away with it doesn't mean you can continue to get away with it to an extent. How do you view the way that they've gone about it, and can they continue it against a team that's this good? Again, like San Francisco.
Well, Rob, I think there are a couple factors at play there. Number one, you've got 2 new coordinators who were growing into their jobs, as we've seen. You had a year's worth of tape on Jaylen Herz and the offense that teams could look at because, what they're doing and what they want to do under Brian Johnson is similar to what they did under Shane Steichen. Now, I think Steichen is an elite play caller. Johnson has been really good at times and not so good at other times. So there's going to be some growing pains there. I think Hertz's knee injury is a factor that doesn't get talked about enough. Nobody wants to bring it up, but the last couple of games, it seems like he's been moving better than he had for the previous weeks. And I think that's an element in their offense that they need to have. That was part of the reason you saw them destroying teams the way that they did last season. Teams didn't know how to defend them with Hertz being able to move the way that he did, and with the line being able to block the way it does, and the number of running backs they had. So, look, can they keep this up where they fall behind at halftime every single week and come back and win? No, they can't. So it depends on how you want to look at it. You can say, this is the team they've been all season, and they're just going to continue to be that team. Or you can say, man, they really haven't put it together yet. And once they do, look out. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen here. I think they've got to get healthy. I think Goddard's got to get back. I think they got to settle some things on defense. I still think the middle of their defense, the linebackers and the safeties are still an issue. I think teams can throw the ball against them. I think it's one of the areas the 49ers will look to exploit on Sunday. But how can you bet against them? They just seem to know how to win. And it's not something you can quantify. It's not something where you can point to a stat and say, this is why they do it. They just do it.
Mike, you said something really interesting earlier on in the show. You mentioned how this team can very well up their quality of play from last year, but still have a lesser record. And, they've essentially exceeded your expectations from a record perspective. Some would argue that the quality of play has gone down, yet their record is what it is. It's such a fascinating parallel when you think about it from that perspective. And the Eagles talk about the standard and playing up to the standard, and they haven't really played up to that. And people are kind of holding them to the fire when it comes to that. Some people say the fan base expectations are so high because of what we've experienced. So I guess my question to you is, do you think the Philadelphia Eagles are victims to their own dogma, right? They've established this standard, this mentality of playing up to the standard and living up to it and keeping the main thing. And they haven't really played up to that. And fans aren't really pleased with that, even though they're 10-1. What are your thoughts about that? Are they victims of their own dogma?
To a certain degree, they are, Tone. I think you're right. I think if you think about the 2 seasons, most recently when they went to the Super Bowl, last season and then in 2017, there was a stretch in each of those seasons where they were just destroying teams. And it was clear that they were the best team in the NFC if they were healthy and all together. Now, that all changed in 2017 and 2018 once Carson Wentz got hurt and doubts started to creep in, rightfully so at the time, with Nick Foles stepping in. Now, they figured it out. They revamped their offense in the playoffs, and they became a machine again. Last season, they just trucked through everybody. It's one of the laughable things that I notice about the 49ers and their fans kind of I chuckle at the fact that we didn't have our quarterback in the game in the NFC Championship game last season. Things would have been different. Yeah, there's a reason you didn't have your quarterback. It's because your head coach set up a play where a tight end tried to block Hassan Reddick, and Hassan Reddick knocked your quarterback out of the game. Like, that's on you guys that you didn't have that's poor coaching. That was the reason that Brock Purdy was out of that game. So to answer your question, Tone, I think to a certain degree they are a victim of this standard that they want to play up to and that people expect of them. But I don't think anybody can look at them and say they've been as dominant as they were last year. They haven't. I think some of what's happened is that the rest of the conference got a little bit better in certain situations. I think the Cowboys are a little bit better. I think some of the other teams that they've played this season, are a little bit better, or they played them at a certain time of season that they did compared to the year before. Circumstances are different. One year is not going to be like another. But the fact that they're 10-1 speaks to whatever it is that they've got, whether it's the core of veterans or something Nick Sirianni does or something Hertz does, that keeps them winning games.
Mike, have you ever covered a guy like Hertz? I mean, I'll just give you an example. Elliott hits the 59-yarder, and I'm not at the game. I'm in the studio waiting to go on, but the cutaway to him, and he's still shaking his head, ticked off, I think, from something that happened earlier in the game. Like, he's stone-faced. He is cyborgish, robotish, uber-focused.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like it. Have you?
I haven't. I hope he's enjoying this at some level.
I don't know that he is, but whatever works.
Maybe he's not, and maybe this is one of those. You hate to make these comparisons, but Hertz brought it up last season. How much he admires Michael Jordan.
Yeah,
and you would see this in guys like Kobe Bryant, who weren't there. You wondered where they were extracting joy from playing these sports and winning. And to a certain degree, there may not have been joy. It just may have been, it's every step to get to be the best and to get to the top of the summit. And then once you get there, you're thinking about getting back there again.
Yeah.
And I wonder if he's feeling some of that too. He was kind of open about this in the post-game press conference after the game against the Bills on Sunday, where he said, I don't even know how I'm supposed to feel. And he just seemed like he was disappointed that he hadn't played a perfect game.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm curious to see if they manage to win the Super Bowl. That's going to be the thing I'm looking for most is what is Jalen Hurts' reaction to them winning a Super Bowl? Will he smile? I mean, and it's funny, guys. I was listening to a national talk show host talk about this, making the comparison between Hurts and Carson Wentz. And the host pointed out that there was a game in 2020, like the second or third game of the season, where the Eagles got their doors blown off and Wentz had played terribly. And he showed up on the Zoom call for his weekly meeting with the media with his hat on backwards. And the talk show host lost his mind over this, basically saying, when you are the face of an NFL franchise, of a $1 billion organization, that is basically it's inappropriate that you're dressed that way. Mm-hmm. That it shows that you're not taking your role as a leader of the franchise and the face of the franchise seriously. Mm. Well, now we have the exact opposite with the Eagles and Jalen Herz. That guy gets up on that podium, sitting behind that table when he's got to answer questions, and he is locked in. And I've tried to ask him questions just because I'm curious about some things.
Yeah, you had a little mini thing last week with him, right?
Yeah, and I've talked to people around the team, and they're like, no, he's not angry at you. He doesn't dislike you or anything like that. He just goes into those interactions with an agenda or a mindset, and he doesn't want to be pushed away from that agenda or a mindset. And if you ask him a question that he hasn't thought of or an answer that takes some time for him to think about, he almost disregards it because he's so committed to projecting this image as I'm the quarterback, I'm the leader, I'm in control.
I know exactly who you're talking about, Mike. One thing he said, Jalen Hurts is very manicured. Very,
yes.
Very intentional and polished. And he brought up some great points, and you brought up something interesting as well. The fact that will he ever really bask in the glory? But the fact of the matter is, greatness is heavy, and when you're trying to achieve it, when you're on this quest for glory and greatness, like MJ, was he ever truly happy or ever truly satisfied about trying to get to that standard? And it begs the question. Jalen Hurts, he isn't really into the personal accolades, but I want to know, do you think he is a prime candidate, or at least in the lead, when it comes to the MVP race? Because again, everything he provides to this team, his ability to just carry them in second halves when things aren't going well, and they just believe unequivocally that they can win every single game that they're in because he's there. Do you think that mentality can carry him and this team not only to the Super Bowl, but also to Jalen Hurts' first MVP award?
I think it's possible, Tone. I do. For the reasons that you cited, plus there are numbers to back it up. ESPN has been putting these numbers out there for a while now about how amazing his stats are when the Eagles are tied or behind in games. And they're ridiculous. They're better than Patrick Mahomes ever was for the Chiefs, when the Eagles are behind and trailing. And that speaks to clutchness. That's always the debate about, is a guy clutch? Well, it feels like he's clutch, but if you look at the numbers, it actually shows he's not. Well, the numbers say that Jalen Hurts is. I've always said this about Hurts, Tone. It's almost like he's in the wrong era of football. If he were a quarterback in the 80s or 90s, all anybody would have, he would be the star of the league far and away, because he would get more credit nationally for the intangible qualities that you're talking about. The leadership, the intelligence, making big plays when they matter most. Everybody would kind of acknowledge this is the guy you want when your team is down 4 with 2 minutes to go and it's getting the ball back. Nowadays, we look so much at stats and advanced stats and how many yards is he throwing for and what's his yards per attempt and touchdown interception ratio and QBR and all of these things. And in many of those stats, as good as Jalen might be, he doesn't stack up to a Brock Purdy or a Patrick Mahomes or whoever the case may be. But the fact is that his team is 10-1. And if you take him away from the Eagles, ain't no way they're 10-1. Like, we are not in, I don't feel like we are in a Carson Wentz, Nick Foles situation here at all.
Right.
I think if the Eagles lose Hurts, forget it.
Yes.
And that's a function of how good he is and a function of who's backing him up in Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, well said. Mike, all right, before we get you out of here, appreciate your time. Sixers, 12-5 start. It's looked a lot different, you know, and Nick Nurse and Maxey continuing to develop and no Harden. I think it's brought a lot of people back. I think a lot of people who were disgusted and kind of checked out are back in. But there's still the question of, ultimately, this is great. It's feel good, but are they better? Are they still capable of getting out of the second round? Overall assessment, what you've seen through 17 here.
Yeah, I think you're right, Rob. I think getting Harden out of here kind of lifted the smoke of indifference, I guess you'd say. Like, people were like, oh, are they really going to run it back with this mercenary? And we just want him out of here. And the fact that Harden is gone has led to more shots and more responsibility for Tyrese Maxey, which has been a good thing, a necessary thing, I think, for Maxey's development. It's actually led to more shots per game for Joel Embiid as well. Nick Nurse, I think, is a terrific coach in that he is much more strategically and schematically engaged game to game than Doc Rivers was. Doc was great for managing personalities and veterans, Harden notwithstanding. But Nurse is much more about, what do we need to do? What defense do we need to play? What offense do we need to run to win this particular game? And look, I think the thing you have to keep in mind too, guys, is that there still could be a trade coming down the pike, right? Like, that was what Daryl Morey was able to do by getting what he got for James Harden. Was they have enough pieces now that if they want to make a move and an opportunity presents itself, they might be able to do that.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Mike, listen, again, great story. I suggest everybody check it out, inquirer.com, and you can link up to it on your Twitter feed as well. But keep up the good work, man. We appreciate you giving us a couple minutes.
Mike, thanks a lot. We really appreciate your time, sir.
No, anytime, guys. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Yes,
you can catch Mike every
right,
Saturday, 10-1 with Glenn Macnell on WIP as well. All right, Tone, let's get a quickie in here. And let's talk. There's an Aaron Rodgers update. There's an update. Yes,
Really?
sir. There is an update. Yes. We'll dig into that. There's a lot of other stuff NFL-wise that we need to get to here. And we're going to do our predictors. Who's going to be the top seed in each conference? Who are the lower tier teams that get in? We'll get into all those kind of things when we come back. Don't go anywhere. That's Tone to Shields. I am Rob Ellis. We're Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. I want to tell you about Flynn Tree Services. Yes, Flynn Tree Services is an experienced, licensed, and insured Pennsylvania tree services company that will trim or remove any unwanted trees off of your property. They offer cost-effective solutions to any tree problem that you may face, and they are experts at trimming all types of trees, and they service southeastern Pennsylvania, South Jersey, and northern Delaware. You can go to their Facebook or Instagram page for more information or a sampling of their work. Give Flynn Tree Services a call at 610-850-2848, 610-850-2848, or online at flyntreeservices.com. That's flyntreeservices.com.